Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. If you're a YouTube viewer, please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll be informed whenever I post a new video. If you mix with other photographers, such as in a camera club, please consider sharing the video too. Only if you feel it's worth it, of course. What's the difference between PTE AV Studio's slide list window and the timeline? Incidentally, you can toggle between these two important windows using the F6 key. And I'm going to be doing that quite often through this video. So where do each of these windows fit into the audio-visual creation process? When we first start a project, we're most likely to begin in the slide list. But there's not a lot of visual difference between the slide list and the timeline. Now, when we do toggle between the two, we notice that the file tree, the file list, and also the mini player all remain the same. So perhaps when we talk about the slide list, we're really referring to this position at the bottom of the screen where we can see the thumbnails. And when we talk about the timeline, we're talking about exactly the same position, the area right at the bottom where we do most of the work. So to begin making a presentation, we may wish to move images from the holding area, the file list here, down into the slide list below. A number of ways we can do that. I can select one image at a time and drag them down. So if I wanted to put them in a certain order, you can see I can do that by just dragging them into position. I could select a number of images together. So if I wanted this one, and this one, holding the control key, selecting all three, I can drag them down. Just for a moment, I'll highlight all of those and drag them back. Something else we can do from the slide list. But if we want to add all of the images in our file list, we can hit Control D. Now let me remove those selections by just clicking one of the thumbnails, and any thumbnail we select, as you can see, we can view in the mini player. We also get the opportunity to sort the images into a running order. We can do that in a couple of ways. Well, three ways, I suppose, if you include dragging them directly from the file list down into the slide list in the order you require them. But if you haven't done that, down at the bottom right of the screen, you do have the opportunity to go into a light box. And in that light box, you can select any image, click drag and drop, and position them anywhere you choose. We don't have to save this screen. As soon as we come back down to the bottom right and go back into the slide list, the images will be in the new order. However, this is a creative process, so it's not uncommon, even if we've sorted the images into a running order, to want to make the odd change. We can do that within the slide list. If I wanted to move this beachscape we're viewing here alongside the beachscape further to the left, I can do that individually. Simply click, drag and drop, either just behind or just in front. There's three changes that we can make from the thumbnails in the slide list. We can adjust the transition style, the transition time, and also the slide duration. In this window, we can do this with either one image at a time or as many as we care to select. For example, what I'll do here is select this image, this one, and this one. If I go to the bottom right corner of any of these thumbnails, I can change the slide duration. So I can just put my cursor into the box, which is reading currently 5 seconds, and if I wanted to increase that to 10, I can do so, touch the enter key, and they're committed. I can do exactly the same now with the little icon that says AB. That will open up our ability to make changes to the transition style, which we can see up here. At the moment it's just a standard fade, but it could be something like the curling of a page. I'll OK that, and we also get the opportunity to change the duration of that transition style. Again, with the images selected, just click into the little box alongside the AB, and I could increase that to 5 seconds. However, in the majority of creative presentations, the timeline is probably better suited for these types of changes. There's no right or wrong way to create a presentation. Generally speaking, we start in the slide list, moving on to the timeline for the more creative part of the process. Now let me show you why the timeline is better for this creative part. I'm going to switch to the timeline and a fully synchronized short demo presentation. Now you can see I've got all of my images nicely placed along the timeline. The images are carefully synchronized with the music and they end with my blank. For example, if you look at the last 3 slides, the last 2 images and the blank, you can see they all line up nicely with peaks of the music. So let me give you just an example of how this looks and sounds by putting the cursor just before the end, and I'm going to press play on the mini player. So you can see there that I've nicely synchronized the entire sequence, and the end is particularly nice. And I've saved this as an ongoing project. Look what happens if I were to open this up into the slide list and make a change. Now as I switch back into the slide list, let's just say that for creative reasons I've changed my mind about the image you can currently see on screen. So I'm going to remove that, and if I just drag that back into the file list, and then we go back to the timeline, I'll use the F6 key to do that, we can see that we've got an immediate problem here. You can see that we've lost the synchronization of the presentation we were making, and that's most evident with those last 2 images and the blank at the end. Here's also a really good reason to always save your project file often, because if you do make a mistake, and we all do that from time to time, you have a way back. Now the most obvious difference between the 2 screens is that we can see our sound file as well as our images in the timeline. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've started a new project. I've gone to the top left of the screen and I've chosen File, New to clear the timeline so we can take a look at this in isolation from the slide list. Now as we look into the holding area, the area we call the file list, you can see the 12 images I've had all along, but there's also a piece of music in there which is called Autumn Leaves. Now that piece of music can be dragged down and put into any position we want. But let's add some of these images, because within the timeline I can do something very similar to what we saw in the slide list. For example, if I double click my image 1 here, and then 2 and 3, 4, 5 and so on, you can see that all of those images are placed nicely along the timeline. And if I were to touch that F6 key and we take a look at the face of the thumbnails, we can see the slide duration is the standard 5 seconds. We have a standard faded transition over 2 seconds. I'll touch the F6 again. Now, with regard to the music, we can drag the music down into any position we wish. Generally speaking, the music will begin at the start of the sequence, so I could drag it down and push it hard to the left. I'm just touching the delete key to remove it because I can drag it down into any position I want, because in some certain circumstances we may not be dealing with music but maybe commentary or sound effects. But we can click and drag and move this around. Now, when we're working in the timeline and we want to make changes to the transition length, we can click at the end of the grey bar here, because this grey bar is showing us that the transition length is in fact 2 seconds, which we know is the default. There you can see it on the flag. But as that double-headed arrow appears, I can reduce that by clicking and dragging, or I can increase it. The one thing you want to avoid is anything like this. As soon as you start to see any red appear, that's a bit of a problem, even a small amount like that. Because what we're telling the software to do here is, before the transition of this slide has ended, start to transition this one onto the screen. So always make sure you can't see any red where the transition times overlap. And using the grey bar to click and drag, we can only change one image at a time. If we did want to change a number of images together, we can select them by holding the control key, but then we'd affect the change by going down to the slide options. There we can change the transition style, and when we select one, we can always change the transition length. Let's go to curling of a page. There we get the transition effect duration, and I could adjust it there if I wanted to. Now, if I can just draw your attention to the final slide in my sequence at the moment, you can see that it ends at the 1 minute point. Now, a few moments ago, when we looked into the slide list of a synchronized presentation, we removed one of the slides, and in doing so, everything then seemed to shunt to the left to take up the gap left by that slide. And if we did that again here in the slide list, the same thing would happen. But let's assume, for creative reasons once again, I've decided that I don't want to use this particular image in my sequence. When I highlight that and hit the delete key, first of all we notice that nothing shunts up to take its place. So we don't spoil any of the synchronization of the presentation we're making. Another side point, of course, is when we hit the delete key, we're not actually deleting the image. The image is still sitting above, because if I change my mind and I wanted to bring it down, I can click it and I can drop it down in any position. You can see the red line there is going to determine exactly where it lands. And of course, this is why we look at the sound file and the peaks of the music, because quite often they allow us to do just that. So because we're working within a timeline, the whole point of the timeline is for us to be able to move our images around to get them nicely synchronized with the music track. So we're going to want to do this in a number of ways. So if I'd synchronized this image, and this image, but then I found I wanted this one to come much further down, then it follows that all the other images have got to do the same. So if I click the thumbnail of any image, all those to the right of it as I click and drag will move with it. And of course I can drag it back. And there you see that red area I was talking about earlier, which is important. We never see that. So any one of these images, if I click and drag, I drag that and all of the images to the right. But of course, at times, to line up the images to the music or the soundtrack, we're going to want to just move one of the images. We can do that by putting the cursor over the edge here and dragging from there. But we can also do it from the blue tag, and I find that's a little more convenient. So Let's assume that I wanted this image to line up with this little peak of the music. I can drag it to the right and you can see that little ghost line there, which allows me to do that. I can see I've got a problem here, so I've got to move these away. But it's very quick and easy to move any of the images into the position we want them. So maybe with this sequence here, I could demonstrate that in practical ways by maybe selecting this image and moving that to the right. So I'm going to take them right up to the end of my music. I'm going to put my cursor just after those three, and I'll right click and I'm going to choose to insert a blank. Because what I'm going to do here is just manually move all of these into position, and you can decide yourself if you feel I've got this right. The first thing is I'm going to pick up this one and just move it away just for a moment. Notice I'm using the blue tag. This one, I need this one lined up nicely with that peak of the music. But because the next one's got to come up rather quickly, then I need a shorter fade. The next one, I can do the same thing with the blue tag. So I can drag it into the rough position. Doesn't matter if we're slightly off, we'll soon notice that when we do a preview in a moment. Then the blank, I'm going to drag that down using the blue tag to line up with that final peak. And of course the music fades out over a fair time, so I can make my blank longer on screen by simply dragging it out, and I can increase the fade so that it matches the music a little better. This one, if I can just ask you to accept that it would be somewhere up here, let's say in that position. So I'm going to put my cursor here and I'm going to press play, and you can hear what I've done. Now that's a good example because I think this one needs to come a little bit to the left, and I think my fade needs to be a bit shorter. So you can see how nice it is to work within the timeline for a creative process like this. Now my video is already 17 minutes long, so I've got to think about bringing this to an end, but there's just one or two more things I'd like to demonstrate to you in the timeline. To speed the process up, I'm going to do another file new, add all the images and the music again, because I want to demonstrate how you can add the images on the fly, and I'll explain and demonstrate that. So with a new project on screen, I can make a start to program that to the music below. But I need a starting point. I've got a blank at the start, and of course we may wish to think about an opening title. I'll just keep things simple here and we'll start from the blank. But the first thing I may want to do is to drag the first of my images to where I want it to appear. How long do I want the blank or the screen to be black before the slideshow starts? I'm going to suggest probably no more than 2 or 3 seconds. So I'm going to go for 2, and you'll notice I'm picking up the blue tag, so I can just drag the image and not all of those following it. But what I also want to do is to move all of the others way to the right. I'll move them up there for the time being. Coming back to my music, I may wish to click and drag that to a position where it sounds nice as the first image appears on screen. So what do I mean about adding images on the fly? Well, we can add images by hitting this little plus sign. So we could play our slideshow using the mini player. We can listen to the music. We know what images are coming up. And as I press the little plus, the image will appear, if I can say it correctly, right where the cursor currently is. Now this isn't anywhere near as difficult as it sounds, as I hope to demonstrate in just a few moments. Now there is an alternative to clicking on the little plus sign here. We can use the insert key on the keyboard, and I have to say that that is my favourite way of doing this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move my cursor back to the start. I'm going to press play, and I'm going to get my finger poised over the insert button, and I'm going to see how far I can get by synchronizing the images to the music on the fly. Now I was using that insert key, but you can see how easy it was to program all of these images. And we know, because the timeline is so flexible, that at any stage we can stop, we can make adjustments to the transition duration, as we may need to do here, or if we feel we've got an image slightly wrong, we can click the blue flag and move it a fraction left or right. And sometimes a small amount of movement can be quite critical to how we appreciate the presentation when it's synchronized images to music. Every so often, of course, we would save our project file. But we do know that if we suddenly change our mind and we want to select this image and remove it and put something in its place, we can highlight and delete the image, and if we had 30 images that follow it, all carefully synchronized to the music, we're not going to spoil that synchronization. However, there may be a better way to do this if you feel you need to change just one image. Now let's take a look at this image that I'm pointing at on the timeline. In fact, I'll click the image so that it shows up in the mini player. Let's assume here that we've carefully synchronized this image. It could include animation. And what I want to do now is change it. I want to keep all of the settings exactly the same, so none of the synchronization is affected, but I want to change the image. Well, if you look up at the top right of the screen, you can see a little icon that says Change Image File. You may not have that in your version of PTE AV Studio. Well, you do have it, but you may have to turn it on. So first, let me show you how you would do that. We'd need to go to the settings at the top left of the screen, Preferences, and Toolbars. Now once we're in the toolbars, you'll find one that says Change Image or Video File. By default it's unticked, so just tick that box, and if you're new to PTE AV Studio, it's not a bad idea to tick all of the boxes, because you can always remove the ticks later for anything you may not use. This Change Image File is an important feature, and I'm unsure why it's not set up as a default. Once we've done that, then if I wanted to change any of these images, and I'll just remind you that this one could have some complex animation, I just select the image, go up to Change Image File, and I'm immediately taken to my project folder where I could select any one of these. So let me just select this one at random. There it is. It takes on exactly the same transition style, transition length, slide duration, and any animation you've created from it. One of the strengths of the timeline is the ability we have, after we've started to create our show, to drop another image between two others without disturbing the careful synchronization of those two. Now that's not an uncommon thing to want to do. For example, if I wanted this image and I wanted to drop it between this one and this one, then all I've got to do is drag it down and release, then do the timing that I feel is appropriate in relation to the music. Audio-visual presentations are a creative process, which means there's 101 different ways we can approach this. Generally speaking, many people will start with the slide list and then move on to the timeline to synchronize their music and video to their soundtrack. But there are other ways of working. I suppose it would be possible to just use the slide list to put together a slideshow, although I think it wouldn't be quite as intuitive as using the timeline. I've created many of my presentations just using the timeline alone. It all depends how you work, but you would need to know how the timeline works and how we can make adjustments to the images, which I hope this video has helped. I'll see you next time.